Stephen cautioned me that this was not similar to previous projects we'd worked on. Most of what I had been connected with, the Indiana Jones films, for instance, were loud, bombastic movies full of flame and fire and fights. And this was going to be very different, he said. This was going to be a political story. The dialogue was going to be probably right up out there being the most important element in the soundtrack. But he needed details and he needed subtleties to create the time period and the place and to enhance the characters where we could. And so we knew that the door was being opened to something unlike the kind of film I was used to working on with Steven. Audio recording really wasn't invented until about 10 years after Lincoln was assassinated by Thomas Edison invented the phonograph in the middle 1870s. But I thought that perhaps there would be artifacts in museums or in collections around the country that might have objects that Lincoln actually heard in his life. And so I set about researching where are things that Lincoln actually heard. And it led down many interesting paths. My first stop was at the Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield, Illinois. And I explained to them what I was looking for. And Dr. James Cornelius there pointed out that they had several objects. For instance, they had the functioning mantle clock from Lincoln's and Thomas Herndon's law office in Springfield. And it still was sitting there on a shelf ticking away. And they recorded that for me. Oh, the watch that Lincoln had in his pocket when he went to Ford's Theater. And there's no way to absolutely prove that, but this was a watch given to Robert Lincoln after his father's assassination and was held by him for many years, given to a friend, and found its way into the Kentucky Historical Society just a few years ago. I called them up, I asked them about recording the watch, and they were very excited. Once again, they had never wound it up to see if it functioned. And they brought a watchsmith out and they carefully wound it up, and by golly, there it was ticking away, perhaps for the first time in well over a century. We don't really know. And so I sent Greg Smith, one of my recording partners, there to Kentucky to record the watch. And they took it into a basement in the museum. Greg had built a little soundproof box to put it in so that we wouldn't hear air conditioning and any other noises that might interfere with it. And they let Greg record it from the front, from the back. They opened the watch up and he put a little tiny mic inside the watch, so we got it from every perspective. And when I got those recordings back, it was really a thrill to know that this ticking was the sound that was close to Lincoln's heart. I made a request, could we come and record the clocks, or specifically a clock in the White House that was there during Lincoln's time. And they graciously invited us to come and do it. And we went to the White House and met with a few curators. We went to the White House and met with the head curator, William Molland. And they brought down from upstairs the portico clock. And this is the clock that's set on the mantle. They brought down from upstairs the portico clock. And this was the clock that sat on the mantelpiece in Lincoln's office during his administration. It was actually purchased in the 1830s during the Andrew Jackson administration. And that clock is still there today. Having the clocks being one element we could retrieve from the past was an appropriate element for the drama itself, because the drama was about meeting a deadline. And the clock was ticking throughout the movie, metaphorically. And having a sprinkling of the actual ticking in the movie, it probably helped in a subtle way the soundtrack to promote that idea and push it forward. When Lincoln is alone in his office and they're voting on the 13th Amendment, there's a very nice moment where all you're left with is Lincoln sitting there with his son, and there's a little ticking of the clock. And then you begin to hear the bells ringing off camera. And historically, that's one of the things that actually happened. And in fact, we went out and recorded the church bells that are there today in Washington within earshot of the White House, the actual bells that Lincoln would have heard, because those bells are still in St. John's Church and in the Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And we recorded those bells and then built that sound of the bells off screen with the actual appropriate sound. And then Lincoln goes to the window and opens it up, and you hear the cannonade, the cannons firing. U.S. Grant had put cannons around, well, there were cannon emplacements around the city for its defense, but they were instructed to have a victory celebration, a cannonade to celebrate this vote. And so the ideas for all of that came from history. It wasn't something that I imposed as a sound designer. We actually had the clock, we had the right bells, and we had the cannons, which we recorded some live Civil War cannons at Manassas battlefield, and we could put it all together. So it was very realistic.